The clack of wooden heels on the boardwalk echoed through the dusty streets of Hot Springs, Arkansas, as Rebecca Lawson hurried toward the general store, her heart pounding against her ribs. The whispers followed her like vultures, circling overhead: the woman who couldn't keep a man, the bride who'd been left standing alone at the altar not once, not twice, but 3 times. Her cheeks burned with humiliation as she quickened her pace, clutching her shawl tighter around her shoulders despite the warm June morning in 1882. "Miss Lawson," called Mrs. Whittaker from the millinery shop doorway, "I just finished that lovely bonnet you ordered. Would you like to try it on?" Rebecca forced a smile. "Not today, thank you. I'm in a bit of a hurry." The truth was, Rebecca couldn't bear to try on another piece of finery. Her wardrobe was filled with unworn wedding clothes, 3 dresses, 3 veils, 3 pairs of satin shoes that had never danced at a wedding celebration. At 26, she was becoming what the townsfolk called a spinster, though that word seemed almost merciful compared to the other names they whispered behind their hands. The general store bell jangled as she pushed through the door, grateful for the momentary respite from prying eyes. Mr. Peterson looked up from behind the counter. "Miss Lawson, what can I help you with today? Just some coffee and sugar, please, and perhaps some writing paper." As Mr. Peterson gathered her items, Rebecca studied the pattern of the floorboards, avoiding his gaze. She knew what he was thinking. Everyone in Hot Springs knew her story. First there was Thomas, who'd run off with her dowry money the morning of their wedding. Then Edward, who'd gotten cold feet and left a note saying he wasn't ready for marriage. And finally, just 6 months ago, Charles had simply not appeared at the church, later discovered drunk at the saloon confessing his love for another woman. "That'll be 85 cents, Mr. Peterson said, sliding her purchases across the counter. Rebecca counted out the coins, painfully aware of how few remained in her purse. Her father's farm was struggling, and her reputation in town made finding respectable work nearly impossible. "Expecting any mail for the Lawson farm?" she asked, as she did every time she came to town. "Nothing today, Miss Lawson." With a nod of thanks, Rebecca gathered her purchases and turned to leave. As she reached for the door, it swung open, and she collided with a solid wall of a man, her packages tumbling to the floor. "Pardon me, madam," came a deep voice as strong hands steadied her. Rebecca looked up into the most striking pair of blue eyes she'd ever seen, set in a sun-weathered face beneath a wide-brimmed hat. The stranger knelt to gather her fallen items, a gesture so courteous it momentarily stunned her. "Thank you," she managed, accepting her packages. "My pleasure, Miss Lawson, Rebecca Lawson." Something flickered across his face, recognition perhaps, but his smile remained kind. "Matthew Forrester," he said, removing his hat briefly. "Just arrived in town." Rebecca nodded, unable to meet his eyes any longer. New to town meant he would soon hear the stories, if he hadn't already. Best to make her escape before that happened. "Welcome to Hot Springs, Mr. Forrester. If you'll excuse me." She hurried past him into the street, feeling his gaze follow her. It wasn't until she was halfway home that she realized she'd forgotten to buy the nails her father had requested. But there was no going back now, not with those blue eyes waiting there. Rebecca's father, Harold Lawson, looked up from mending a fence when she approached their modest farmhouse outside town. "Back already, Becca," she nodded, handing him her purchases. It was busy in town. Harold's weathered face softened with understanding. At 62, with rheumatism creeping into his joints, he worried constantly about his daughter's future. His wife had passed 10 years prior, leaving him to raise Rebecca alone, and now his health was failing too. "Any news?" he asked hopefully. Rebecca shook her head. They were waiting for word from her uncle in California, hoping he might offer them a fresh start away from Hot Springs and its memories. "I forgot the nails," she admitted. "I'm sorry, Pa. No matter, we'll make do." He patted her hand. "Why don't you rest? I'll finish up here." Rebecca knew he couldn't finish the repairs without the nails, but she nodded and retreated to the house. Inside, she sank onto a kitchen chair and allowed herself a moment of weakness, a single tear trailing down her cheek. The next morning, Rebecca was gathering eggs from the henhouse when the sound of an approaching horse made her look up. A rider was coming down their long drive, and even at a distance, she recognized the broad shoulders and confident posture of the man from the general store. Hastily wiping her hands on her apron, she stepped out to meet him, curiosity overcoming her usual caution with strangers. Matthew Forrester tipped his hat as he dismounted. "Miss Lawson, hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all, Mr. Forrester. What brings you out this way?" He reached into his saddlebag and produced a small paper package. "You left these at the store yesterday. Mr. Peterson mentioned they were for your father." Rebecca accepted the package of nails, surprise rendering her momentarily speechless. "You rode all this way to deliver nails?" A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Well, Mr. Peterson mentioned your farm was this direction, and I was scouting the area anyway." "Scouting? I'm looking to settle nearby. I've been riding the cattle trails for too long. Time to put down some roots." Before Rebecca could respond, Harold emerged from the barn, limping slightly as he approached. "We have company, Becca. Pa, this is Mr. Matthew Forrester. He's new to Hot Springs. Mr. Forrester, my father, Harold Lawson." The men shook hands, Harold's gaze assessing the stranger with fatherly scrutiny. "Mr. Forrester kindly brought the nails I forgot yesterday," Rebecca explained. Harold's eyebrows rose. "Mighty considerate of you, sir." "Just being neighborly," Matthew replied. His eyes scanned the farm, the sagging fence, the roof missing shingles, the fields that needed plowing. "Looks like you've got your hands full here." Harold straightened, pride evident despite his frail frame. "Nothing I can't handle." Rebecca recognized her father's stubborn determination, but she also saw Matthew's gaze lingering on Harold's arthritic hands. "Actually, Pa," she ventured, "perhaps Mr. Forrester would join us for breakfast before he continues his scouting, as thanks for his trouble." Harold looked surprised but nodded. "Of course. If you've no pressing business, Mr. Forrester," Matthew removed his hat. "I'd be honored, sir." Over a simple meal of biscuits and eggs, Rebecca learned that Matthew had spent 10 years driving cattle from Texas to Kansas, that he'd saved enough to buy his own land, and that he had no family to speak of. He spoke with an easy confidence that suggested he was comfortable in his own skin, a trait Rebecca found both foreign and fascinating. "What brings you to Arkansas?" Harold asked. "Cattle country's further west. Heard good things about the land here. Affordable, fertile." "And I've had my fill of dust and drought." Matthew glanced at Rebecca. "Thought I might try my hand at something more permanent." "Hard to find good help these days," Harold remarked, rubbing his aching wrist. Rebecca tensed, recognizing her father's hint. Matthew set down his coffee cup. "I'd be happy to lend a hand while I'm looking around, Mr. Lawson. No charge, just being neighborly." "We couldn't impose," Rebecca said quickly. "No imposition. I've got time, and from what I can see, those fence posts won't set themselves." Harold brightened. "Well, if you're offering." And just like that, Matthew Forrester became a regular fixture at the Lawson farm. He would arrive early, work alongside Harold until midday, share lunch with them, and then continue his search for land in the afternoons. Rebecca found herself looking forward to these visits, despite her determination to guard her heart. One afternoon, as Rebecca hung laundry while Matthew and her father repaired the barn roof. She overheard a conversation that made her freeze. "So you've heard the stories about my daughter?" Harold's voice drifted down. Rebecca clutched a wet sheet, mortification washing over her. "I've heard talk in town," Matthew admitted. "Don't put much stock in gossip." "It's not gossip," Harold sighed. 3 times she's been ready to wed. 3 times she's been disappointed. Not her fault, mind you, just bad luck with men. Or perhaps good fortune in the end, Matthew replied. Better to learn a man's true character before marriage than after. Rebecca exhaled slowly, surprised by his perspective. "She's a good girl," Harold continued. "Deserves better than she's got. This farm's failing and I'm not getting any younger. Been trying to convince her to go to her uncle in California, but she won't leave me." "She's loyal," Matthew observed, "to a fault. Worries me what will become of her when I'm gone." There was a pause, then Matthew's voice, lower. "Mr. Lawson, I hope you don't find me forward, but I've been meaning to ask you something." Rebecca strained to hear, but a sudden gust of wind carried their words away. Her heart raced with uncertainty. Was Matthew asking permission to court her? Or was he simply inquiring about buying their land? The thought of either possibility filled her with a confusing mixture of hope and dread. That evening, after Matthew had gone, her father seemed unusually cheerful as they ate supper. Rebecca waited for him to mention their conversation, but he spoke only of the repaired roof and tomorrow's weather. "Mr. Forrester seems quite capable," she ventured. Harold nodded, a mysterious smile playing on his lips. "Indeed he does, Becca. Indeed he does." The following Sunday, Rebecca was surprised when Matthew appeared at their pew in church. He had never joined them for services before. Even more surprising was his attire gone, was the practical work clothing, replaced by a crisp black suit that accentuated his broad shoulders. His usually untamed hair was neatly combed, and when he smiled at her, Rebecca felt an unfamiliar fluttering in her chest. Throughout the service, she was acutely aware of his presence beside her, of the townspeople's curious glances, of the whispers that would surely follow. By the time Reverend Miller delivered the final blessing, her nerves were strung tight as fiddle strings. "Miss Lawson," Matthew said as they exited the church, "would you do me the honor of taking a walk with me this afternoon?" Rebecca glanced at her father, who nodded encouragingly. "I would like that," she replied, trying to ignore Mrs. Whittaker's wide-eyed stare from the church steps. That afternoon, they strolled along the creek that ran behind the Lawson property, the late summer sun filtering through the trees. Rebecca felt unusually self-conscious in her Sunday best, a blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes, or so her father had always told her. "Your father tells me you're quite the reader," Matthew said, breaking a comfortable silence. Rebecca nodded. "Books were my mother's passion. She taught me to love them before she passed." "What do you enjoy reading most?" "Stories of far-off places," she admitted. "London, Paris, New York. Places I'll likely never see." "Why not?" The question caught her off guard. "Well, my place is here with my father." Matthew stopped walking, turning to face her. "Rebecca, may I speak plainly?" Her heart skipped. "Of course. I've found a property. Good land about 5 miles west of town. There's a house that needs work, but it's solid. Room for cattle, horses, room to grow." Rebecca smiled, ignoring a pang of disappointment. "Congratulations. You must be pleased to have found what you were looking for." "Not everything I'm looking for." His blue eyes held hers. "The house is too big for just one person." Rebecca's breath caught as understanding dawned. "I know we haven't known each other long," he continued. "And I know your past experiences might make you cautious, but I've lived enough to recognize something good when I see it." "Mr. Forrester, Matthew, please." Matthew. His name felt intimate on her lips. I don't know what my father has told you, but I've not had the best luck with engagements. A smile tugged at his mouth. So I've heard. 3 times at the altar, Rebecca winced. You must think me a fool. No. His voice was firm. I think you're a woman who believes in promises even when men have proven they don't always keep them. He took a step closer. I'm not asking for your hand, not yet. I'm asking if I might court you properly, get to know you better. Let you get to know me. Relief and something like disappointment mingled in Rebecca's chest. I would like that, she said softly. Good. His smile was warm enough to chase away the chill that had settled in her heart over the past few years. Because I have a feeling about you, Rebecca Lawson. A very good feeling indeed. As autumn painted the Arkansas hills in vibrant colors, Matthew Forrester courted Rebecca with a steadfast devotion that gradually wore down her defenses. He brought her books, adventures, and romances that transported her far beyond hot springs. He helped her father with the difficult harvest, refusing payment beyond their shared meals. And every Sunday, he appeared at church in his best suit, proudly escorting her down the aisle despite the lingering whispers. For Halloween, he surprised her with an invitation to the town harvest dance, something Rebecca had avoided for years, unwilling to face the pitying looks and wagging tongues. I can't, she protested when he asked. They were picking apples in the small orchard behind the farmhouse, the October air crisp against her cheeks. Why not? Matthew balanced on a ladder, reaching for a particularly fine specimen. You know why? Everyone will be talking about me, about us. Let them talk. He descended the ladder and placed the apple in her basket. I'd like to dance with the prettiest girl in Arkansas, and I don't care who knows it. His confidence was infectious, and Rebecca found herself agreeing despite her misgivings. The night of the dance, she wore her mother's old dress, hastily altered to fit her slightly taller frame. It was forest green, simple but elegant, with tiny pearl buttons down the bodice. When Matthew arrived to escort her and her father to town, his expression made all her nervousness worthwhile. You look beautiful, he said, his voice hushed with sincerity. The town hall was festooned with autumn decorations, pumpkins, corn stalks, and paper lanterns casting a warm glow over the proceedings. Rebecca felt the stares as they entered, heard the momentary lull in conversation before the fiddles started up again. Ignore them, Matthew whispered, his hand warm at the small of her back. They're just jealous. The first dance was awkward, Rebecca stiff with self-consciousness as Matthew led her through the steps. But his steady presence and unwavering smile gradually melted her reserve, and by the third song, she was laughing as he twirled her across the floor. During a break in the music, Matthew went to fetch them punch, leaving Rebecca momentarily alone. She was admiring the decorations when a familiar voice made her blood run cold. Rebecca, you're looking well. She turned to find Charles Winslow, the third man who had left her at the altar, standing uncomfortably close. His breath smelled of whiskey, his once handsome face flushed. Charles, she acknowledged stiffly. Please excuse me. He caught her arm as she tried to move past. Now, don't be like that. I've been wanting to talk to you, explain things. There's nothing to explain. She tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. I made a mistake. That girl, it didn't work out. I've been thinking maybe you and I, is there a problem here? Matthew's voice was perfectly controlled, but Rebecca saw the dangerous glint in his eyes as he approached, 2 cups of punch still in his hands. Charles released her arm, drawing himself up. Though taller than Matthew, he lacked the cowboy's solid build and quiet strength. Just catching up with an old friend, Charles said, false cheer in his voice. You must be the new fellow in town. Heard you've been sniffing around the Lawson place. Matthew set the cups down on a nearby table with deliberate care. I believe Miss Lawson was trying to leave this conversation. This doesn't concern you, Cowboy. Rebecca concerns me. Very much. The tension between the men was palpable, drawing attention from nearby dancers. Rebecca placed a restraining hand on Matthew's arm. Matthew, please, he's not worth it. Matthew's gaze softened as he looked at her, and he nodded once. You're right. He offered her his arm. Would you care to dance? As they moved away, Charles called after them. Better be careful, Cowboy, she's cursed. 3 men smart enough to run, you'll be the 4th. Rebecca felt Matthew stiffen, but he kept walking, guiding her back to the dance floor where a waltz was beginning. As he took her in his arms, she kept her eyes downcast, shame burning her cheeks. I'm sorry, she whispered. For what? For that scene. For bringing you into my mess. Matthew's hand tightened on her waist, pulling her a fraction closer than was strictly proper. Rebecca, look at me. Reluctantly, she raised her eyes to his. That man is a fool, he said, his voice low and intense. All 3 of them were. Their loss is my gain, and I'm grateful for it every day. You can't mean that. Not after, especially after that. He guided her through a turn, their bodies moving in perfect harmony. Some men can't recognize a treasure when it's right in front of them. I'm not one of those men. Rebecca's heart swelled with an emotion she was finally ready to name. As the music swelled around them, she allowed herself to truly hope for the first time in years. The incident at the dance seemed to accelerate their courtship. Matthew began spending evenings at the Lawson farm, often staying for supper and lingering afterwards to read or play checkers with Harold while Rebecca mended or baked. The 3 of them fell into an easy rhythm that felt, to Rebecca's surprise, like family. As November brought colder weather, Matthew focused on preparing his new property for winter. Rebecca had yet to see the place, though he spoke of it often: the sturdy barn, the creek running along the eastern boundary, the view of the hills from the front porch. You should bring Rebecca out to see the place, Harold suggested one evening as they sat by the fire, before the snow flies. Matthew glanced at Rebecca, a question in his eyes. I'd like that. Perhaps this Sunday after church. Rebecca nodded, trying to ignore the meaningful look that passed between her father and Matthew. Sunday dawned clear and cold, a perfect late autumn day. After services, Matthew helped Rebecca into his wagon, tucking a warm blanket around her legs against the chill. The 5-mile journey passed quickly as Matthew pointed out landmarks and shared his plans for the property, which cattle to buy in the spring, where he'd plant the kitchen garden, how he'd expand the house eventually. You've thought of everything, Rebecca observed, charmed by his enthusiasm. Not quite everything. There was an undertone to his voice that made her pulse quicken. The house came into view as they crested a small hill, a 2-story white clapboard structure with a wide front porch, set against a backdrop of oak and pine trees. It was larger than Rebecca had imagined, though clearly in need of some repairs. Smoke curled from the chimney, surprising her. Someone's there, she asked. Matthew smiled mysteriously. I asked Mrs. Cooper from town to come out this morning. Light the fires, prepare a little something. He helped her down from the wagon and offered his arm as they approached the house. The front door was freshly painted red, a welcoming splash of color against the white siding. Inside, Rebecca gasped softly. Though sparsely furnished, the house was spotlessly clean, with polished wooden floors and large windows that filled the rooms with light. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, and the scent of something delicious wafted from what must be the kitchen. Matthew, it's lovely. You really think so? The hint of uncertainty in his voice touched her. Of course. It just needs some curtains, perhaps a few rugs. She trailed off, realizing she was talking as if the house might someday be hers to decorate. Matthew's smile suggested he'd followed her thoughts exactly. I'd like your opinion on something upstairs, if you don't mind. He led her up a wide staircase to a hallway with 4 doors. Opening the first, he revealed a large bedroom with a 4-poster bed, the only piece of furniture in the room, besides a chest of drawers and a rocking chair by the window. "This is the master bedroom," he said, watching her face carefully. "I've ordered more furniture from Chicago, but it won't arrive until spring." Rebecca moved to the window, which offered a spectacular view of the rolling hills. "The view is magnificent." "I thought perhaps blue curtains here," Matthew said, coming to stand beside her, "to match your eyes." Rebecca turned to him, suddenly very aware of his proximity and the intimacy of standing in his bedroom with him. "Matthew." He took her hands in his expression serious. "Rebecca, I brought you here today because I wanted you to see the life I'm building, the life I hope you might consider sharing." Her heart began to race. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" "Not yet." He squeezed her hands gently. "I made you a promise to court you properly, to let you know me. I intend to keep that promise, but I want you to know my intentions are serious. When I do ask, and I will ask, it won't be on a whim. It will be because I've thought about it, planned for it, built for it." Tears pricked Rebecca's eyes, touched by his consideration. After 3 failed engagements, most men would have assumed she'd jump at any proposal, but Matthew understood her need for certainty, for trust. "Thank you," she whispered, "for understanding." He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch feather light. "You're worth the wait, Rebecca Lawson." Downstairs, they found Mrs. Cooper had prepared a picnic lunch by the fire: fried chicken, biscuits, apple pie, and hot cider. As they ate, Matthew described his plans for the property in greater detail, always including Rebecca in his vision. "We could plant fruit trees along that southern slope," he'd say, "or the second bedroom would make a perfect nursery someday." By the time they began the journey back to the Lawson farm, Rebecca knew 2 things with absolute certainty. She was deeply in love with Matthew Forrester, and when he did propose, her answer would be yes. December brought the first snow, transforming hot springs into a winter wonderland. With the harvest in and the farm secured for winter, Harold's health took a worrying turn. His cough deepened, and his joints pained him so severely that some mornings he could barely rise from bed. Rebecca worried constantly, dividing her time between caring for her father and maintaining the farm. Matthew was there almost daily, chopping firewood, making repairs, and often bringing supplies from town, including, to Rebecca's embarrassment, a bottle of expensive cough syrup for Harold. "You shouldn't spend your money on us," she protested. "It's not charity," Matthew insisted. "It's what neighbors do, what family does." The word family hung between them, full of promise. As Christmas approached, Harold's condition worsened. The doctor from Hot Springs diagnosed pneumonia and prescribed bed rest, hot compresses, and a foul-smelling tonic that Harold refused to take until Matthew coaxed him with remarkable patience. On Christmas Eve, with Harold finally sleeping peacefully, Rebecca and Matthew sat by the kitchen fire, sharing a pot of coffee. "You're exhausted," Matthew observed, noting the dark circles under her eyes. "I'm fine." Rebecca attempted a smile. "Just worried about Pa." Matthew reached across the table and took her hand. "He's strong and stubborn, like his daughter. The doctor says if he makes it through the next few days, he should recover. Then we'll make sure he does." Matthew's thumb traced circles on her palm, sending shivers up her arm. "Rebecca, there's something I need to tell you." The seriousness in his voice alarmed her. "What is it?" "I've been offered a job, trail boss for a cattle drive from Fort Smith to Wichita." Rebecca's heart sank. "When?" "March. It would mean being gone for at least 2 months. "I see." She withdrew her hand, trying to hide her disappointment. "That's a good opportunity. The pay is excellent. Enough to finish the repairs on my house, buy twice the cattle I'd planned. He hesitated. But I don't want to leave you and your father, especially now. Rebecca straightened her shoulders. We managed before you came along, Matthew. We'll manage while you're gone. That's not what I meant. He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. I don't want to be apart from you, but this job could secure our future. The word "our" hung in the air, unacknowledged but unmistakable. You should take it, Rebecca said firmly. Pa will be better by March and 2 months will pass quickly. Matthew studied her face. You're sure? I'm sure. She wasn't, not really, but she wouldn't stand in the way of his success. Not when he'd done so much for her and her father. He smiled then, relief evident in his features. I've been thinking, after the cattle drive, once your father's health is better. Well, I've been saving something for the right moment. Rebecca's pulse quickened. Oh, before he could continue, a weak call came from Harold's bedroom. Becca, the moment broken, Rebecca rose quickly. I should check on him. Matthew nodded, understanding in his eyes. Go. I'll bank the fire before I leave. That night, as Rebecca sat by her father's bedside, listening to his labored breathing, she allowed herself to dream of a future with Matthew living in the White House with the red door, perhaps with children running through those spacious rooms. The thought no longer frightened her as it once might have. Instead, it felt right, inevitable, like the changing of seasons. Harold rallied over the next few weeks, his iron constitution eventually overcoming the pneumonia. By February, he was well enough to sit on the porch on milder days, wrapped in blankets and enjoying the winter sunshine. Rebecca could finally breathe easier, though she knew his recovery was incomplete. At his age, such a severe illness took a greater toll. Matthew continued to visit daily, often bringing news from town or small gifts, a newspaper from Little Rock, peppermint candies, once even a small bottle of French perfume that made Rebecca blush with pleasure. As the date of his departure for Fort Smith approached, she found herself treasuring these moments more intensely, storing up memories for the long separation ahead. One crisp February afternoon, as Harold dozed in his chair and Matthew helped Rebecca wash the lunch dishes, he broached a subject that had been on her mind. I've been thinking about your father while I'm gone, he said, drying a plate with careful attention. He's better, but he still needs looking after. We'll manage, Rebecca assured him, though the thought of handling the spring planting alone was daunting. I've spoken with young Tim Walker in town. He's agreed to come out 3 days a week to help with the heavier work. I've paid him through April. Rebecca nearly dropped the cup she was washing. Matthew, you can't do that. Already done. His tone brooked no argument. Consider it an early birthday gift for your father. But Rebecca. He set down the dish towel and turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. Please let me do this, for my peace of mind if nothing else. The sincerity in his eyes melted her resistance. Thank you, she whispered. His gaze dropped to her lips, and for a breathless moment, Rebecca thought he might kiss her. They had never shared more than the touch of hands, the occasional embrace. But Harold's cough from the porch broke the spell, and Matthew stepped back, a flush creeping up his neck. I should get going, he said, his voice slightly rough. Still have preparations to make before I leave. As he gathered his coat and hat, Rebecca followed him to the door. When do you ride out? Day after tomorrow. Early. He hesitated, then added, I'd like to say goodbye properly. Could I call on you tomorrow evening? Rebecca nodded. I'd like that. True to his word, Matthew arrived the following evening dressed in his Sunday best, bearing gifts for both Rebecca and her father, a new pipe and tobacco pouch for Harold, and for Rebecca, a small leather-bound journal. For your thoughts while I'm away, he explained as she ran her fingers over the smooth cover. It's beautiful, she murmured. Thank you. Harold, showing more energy than he had in weeks, entertained them with stories of his youth for an hour before excusing himself to bed with an exaggerated yawn that fooled neither of them. Alone in the parlor, Rebecca and Matthew sat on the small sofa, closer than propriety might strictly allow. The lamplight cast a warm glow over the room, creating an intimate atmosphere that made Rebecca's pulse quicken. "I've never been good at goodbyes," Matthew admitted, taking her hand. "Then don't say goodbye," Rebecca suggested. "Say until we meet again." His smile was tender. "I like that better." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "I have something else for you." Rebecca's breath caught as he placed the box in her palm. It was too large for a ring, she noted with a mixture of relief and disappointment. "Open it," he encouraged. Inside lay a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. Rebecca lifted it carefully, admiring the intricate etching on its surface, a pattern of tiny stars surrounding a crescent moon. "It's exquisite," she breathed. "Open the locket," Matthew urged, his eyes never leaving her face. With trembling fingers, Rebecca worked the tiny clasp. Inside was a miniature photograph of Matthew, his expression serious but his eyes kind, just as they had been the day they first met. "Now I'll be with you, even when I'm away," he said softly. Tears pricked Rebecca's eyes as she looked up at him. "Will you help me put it on?" Matthew took the necklace and moved to sit behind her. Rebecca gathered her hair to one side, exposing her neck. His fingers were surprisingly deft as he fastened the clasp, and when he was done, his hands lingered on her shoulders. "Rebecca," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. She turned to face him, their faces now inches apart. "Yes." "When I return, there's something important I want to ask you." His gaze was intense, questioning. "Something I've wanted to ask for some time now." Rebecca's heart hammered against her ribs. "I'll be here waiting," she promised. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Matthew leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, reverent, a promise rather than a demand. Rebecca's eyes fluttered closed as she savored the sensation, her hand coming up to rest against his chest, feeling the strong beat of his heart beneath her palm. When they parted, Matthew rested his forehead against hers. 2 months, he said. "It's going to feel like an eternity." "Write to me," Rebecca urged, "and I'll write in the journal you gave me. When you return, you can read every word. I'll hold you to that." He kissed her once more, briefly but with unmistakable passion, before reluctantly rising to his feet. "I should go. Dawn comes early." At the door, he turned back to her, his expression serious. "Rebecca Lawson, you've bewitched me completely. I'll come back to you as soon as I'm able." "I'll be waiting," she repeated, the silver locket warm against her skin. After he left, Rebecca stood on the porch long after his figure had disappeared into the darkness, her fingers tracing the outline of the locket. For the first time in years, her heart felt full, hopeful, unburdened by past disappointments. The weeks after Matthew's departure crawled by with agonizing slowness. True to his word, Tim Walker came regularly to help with the farm work, and Harold continued to improve, though he tired easily. Rebecca threw herself into spring cleaning and preparations for planting, working from dawn until dusk to keep her mind occupied. Letters from Matthew arrived sporadically, brief, but heartfelt notes describing the cattle, the weather, the endless prairie. Rebecca read each one multiple times before carefully storing them in her mother's old sewing box. In her journal, she poured out her thoughts, her hopes, her growing certainty that Matthew was the man she wanted to spend her life with. By mid-April, the farm was showing signs of revival. New calves frolicked in the pasture, the kitchen garden was sprouting promising green shoots, and Harold had regained enough strength to supervise Tim's work around the property. Rebecca allowed herself to believe that everything was finally going right in her life. Then the accident happened. She was in town, purchasing seeds for the summer vegetable garden when Sheriff Wilson found her at the general store. "Miss Lawson, you'd better come quick. It's your pa." The journey home was a blur, the sheriff's words echoing in her mind, a fallen tree limb, Harold pinned beneath it, Tim running for help. By the time they reached the farm, Dr. Reynolds's buggy was already there, a grim harbinger. Harold was conscious when Rebecca rushed to his bedside, but his breathing was shallow, his face gray with pain. "Pa," she cried, taking his hand. "Becca." His voice was barely a whisper. "Don't fret, girl, just a little accident." Dr. Reynolds drew her aside while his assistant tended to Harold. "Miss Lawson, I need to be frank. Your father's injuries are severe. Several broken ribs, likely internal bleeding, at his age with his recent illness. He'll recover," Rebecca insisted. "He's strong." The doctor's kind eyes held no false hope. "He's very weak, Miss Lawson. I've given him something for the pain, but I suggest you prepare yourself, and perhaps send for any family who might wish to say goodbye." The world tilted beneath Rebecca's feet. "How long?" "Days. Perhaps a week if he's fortunate." Rebecca wrote 3 letters that night, one to her uncle in California, one to her father's sister in Tennessee, and one to Matthew, in care of the cattle broker in Wichita. She knew the chances of any of them arriving in time were slim, but she had to try. For 5 days, Rebecca barely left Harold's side, sleeping in snatches on a chair beside his bed. He drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid enough to share memories or offer feeble words of comfort, other times lost in fever dreams that took him back to his youth. On the 6th morning, Harold woke with unexpected clarity, his eyes finding Rebecca's face with purpose. "Becca," he rasped. "Come closer, girl." She leaned in, holding his frail hand between both of hers. "I'm here, Pa, need to tell you. Your mother's locket, in my dresser top drawer." "Hidden in my socks." Rebecca frowned, confused. "Pa, you're not making sense. Find it." His grip tightened with surprising strength. "Promise me." "I promise," she soothed, "but you can show me yourself when you're better." Harold's chuckle turned into a painful cough. "Always stubborn." "Like your mother." He closed his eyes briefly, gathering strength. "I'm not afraid, Becca. Your mother's waiting for me, been waiting a long time." Tears flowed freely down Rebecca's cheeks. "Pa, please don't talk like that. Listen to me now." His voice grew firmer. "That cowboy of yours. He's a good man, better than those other fools." Rebecca nodded, unable to speak through her tears. "Don't let fear stop you from happiness. Promise me." "I promise, Pa." Harold seemed satisfied, his breathing easing slightly. "Good girl. Now read to me from your mother's Bible." The psalm she loved. Rebecca reached for the worn family Bible on the bedside table, turning to the 23rd Psalm. As she read the familiar words, Harold's eyes drifted closed, a peaceful expression settling over his features. By the time she finished reading, he was gone, slipping away so quietly that Rebecca continued reading for several minutes before realizing the truth. The funeral was held 3 days later, a simple service attended by nearly everyone in Hot Springs. Rebecca stood dry-eyed beside the grave, accepting condolences with quiet dignity, though inside she felt hollowed out, empty. Neither her uncle nor her aunt had arrived in time, and there had been no word from Matthew. That evening, alone in the silent farmhouse, Rebecca remembered her father's strange request about her mother's locket. Moving mechanically, she went to his bedroom and opened the dresser drawer. Buried beneath neatly folded socks, she found a small velvet pouch. Inside was not her mother's locket, which Rebecca had always assumed was buried with her, but a ring, a delicate gold band set with a small diamond flanked by 2 sapphires. With the ring was a folded note in her father's shaky handwriting. "My dearest Becca, this was your grandmother's ring, given to your mother on their wedding day and meant for you when the time came. I've held on to it, waiting for the right man to be worthy of both the ring and you. I believe Matthew Forrester is that man. Be happy, my darling girl. With all my love." Pa. Fresh tears spilled down Rebecca's cheeks as she slipped the ring onto her finger, too large but beautiful nonetheless. In that moment, she longed for Matthew with an intensity that physically ached his strength, his quiet confidence, his unwavering belief in her. As if summoned by her thoughts, a knock sounded at the door. Rebecca hastily wiped her tears and went to answer it, expecting perhaps a neighbor with another casserole or loaf of sympathy bread. Instead, there stood Matthew, hat in hand, his clothes travel-stained and his face haggard with fatigue. "Rebecca," he breathed. "Matthew." His name was half sob, half prayer. He crossed the threshold and gathered her into his arms, holding her tightly as if he might disappear. "I came as soon as I got your letter. Rode day and night. I'm so sorry I wasn't here." Rebecca buried her face against his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and pine and something uniquely Matthew. "You're here now," she whispered. "You're here now." Later, after Rebecca had made coffee and Matthew had washed away the dust of travel, they sat at the kitchen table, hands intertwined. Matthew listened as Rebecca recounted her father's final days, his peaceful passing, the discovery of her grandmother's ring. "He liked you," Rebecca concluded softly. "He wanted us to be happy." Matthew squeezed her hand. "I want that too, more than anything." He hesitated, studying her face. "But I know you're grieving. This isn't the right time for what I came back planning to ask." Rebecca looked down at their joined hands, then back to his face. "My father made me promise not to let fear stop me from finding happiness." She took a deep breath. "I'm not afraid anymore, Matthew." His eyes darkened with emotion. "Rebecca, are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying that life is short and unpredictable. I'm saying that I love you, and I don't want to waste another day pretending I don't know what I want." Matthew rose from his chair and, still holding her hand, knelt before her. "This isn't how I planned it," he admitted. "I had a speech prepared." "A proper proposal." Rebecca smiled through fresh tears. "I don't need speeches, I just need you." "Rebecca Lawson," Matthew said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes, "will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." As he rose to embrace her, Rebecca added with a hint of her old humor, "After all, fourth time's the charm, right?" Matthew laughed, the sound brightening the summer house. "I'd say so." "And I promise you, Rebecca, I'll be waiting at that altar if I have to crawl there on my hands and knees." They decided on a June wedding, giving Rebecca time to properly mourn her father while also honoring his wish for her happiness. The town of Hot Springs buzzed with the news the woman left at the altar 3 times was trying again with the handsome cowboy. Some wagered he would disappear like the others. Others, who had witnessed Matthew's devotion during Harold's illness, bet differently. Rebecca moved temporarily to Mrs. Cooper's boarding house in town, unable to bear the emptiness of the farmhouse without her father. Matthew threw himself into finishing the renovations on his house, their future home, with renewed purpose. They met every day, often working side by side on the house, planning their life together. "What about your father's farm?" Matthew asked one afternoon as they painted the kitchen walls a cheerful yellow. Rebecca paused, brush in hand. "I've been thinking about that. It doesn't feel right to sell it, but I can't imagine anyone else living there." "We could keep it," Matthew suggested. Hire someone to work the land. It could be a legacy for our children someday, our children. The words sent a pleasant warmth through Rebecca's chest. I'd like that. As June approached, Rebecca faced the task of choosing a wedding dress. Her previous 3 hung in Mrs. Cooper's spare closet, each a reminder of past disappointments. You should wear something new, Mrs. Cooper advised. A fresh start. Rebecca agreed but was conscious of her limited funds. Her father's farm would eventually provide income, but for now her resources were modest. The solution came unexpectedly. Mrs. Whittaker, the milliner who had once watched Rebecca hurry past her shop in shame, arrived at the boarding house one afternoon with a large box. "Miss Lawson," she said, uncharacteristically hesitant, "I heard about your upcoming nuptials. And well, my sister in Little Rock is a dressmaker. She sent me this some time ago, but it's never suited any of my customers. I thought perhaps." She opened the box to reveal a wedding dress of ivory silk, simple but elegantly cut, with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Rebecca gasped, running her fingers over the smooth fabric. "Mrs. Whittaker, it's beautiful, but I couldn't possibly please," the older woman interrupted. "Consider it a wedding gift, and perhaps an apology for unkind gossip in the past." Touched by the gesture, Rebecca accepted the dress. When she tried it on later, it fit as if made for her, needing only minor alterations to the hem. The week before the wedding, Rebecca began to have nightmares, dreams where she stood alone at the altar, Matthew nowhere to be found. She would wake gasping, heart racing, unable to shake the lingering dread despite her rational belief in Matthew's devotion. 2 days before the ceremony, Matthew found her at the farmhouse, where she had gone to collect some of her mother's china for their new home. She was sitting on the porch steps, staring at nothing, the china forgotten inside. "Rebecca," he sat beside her, concern evident in his voice. "What's wrong?" She couldn't meet his eyes. "Nothing, just memories." "Rebecca." He gently turned her face toward his. "Talk to me, please." The tenderness in his expression broke her resolve. "I'm having dreams," she confessed. "Terrible dreams where you don't come to the church, where I'm standing there alone again." Understanding dawned in Matthew's eyes. "Ah, I know it's foolish," she hurried on. "I know you're not like them. But I can't help it." Matthew was quiet for a moment, then stood abruptly, pulling Rebecca to her feet. "Come with me." "Where are we going? You'll see." He helped her into his wagon and drove directly to the church, a small white building at the edge of town. Reverend Miller was in the garden, tending to the roses that would decorate the altar on Sunday. "Mr. Forrester, Miss Lawson, is something the matter?" he called as they approached. "No, Reverend," Matthew replied, "but I was hoping you might help us with something." To Rebecca's confusion, Matthew explained that they needed to see the inside of the church, specifically the altar where they would be married. The Reverend, though puzzled, obliged, unlocking the doors and ushering them inside. The church was cool and dim, sunlight filtering through stained glass to create pools of colored light on the wooden floor. Matthew led Rebecca up the aisle to the altar, then turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Rebecca Lawson," he said solemnly, "I want you to look at this spot. Right here, where we're standing." She nodded, bewildered. "On Sunday, I will be waiting right here when you walk down that aisle. Not outside, not at the back, but right here. I'll arrive an hour early just to be sure. And if by some catastrophe, flood, fire, or act of God I am delayed, I will send word. And then I will still come, even if I have to swim or crawl or be carried." His blue eyes held hers with fierce intensity. "I love you, Rebecca. I have since the moment you bumped into me at the general store. Nothing on this earth could keep me from marrying you on Sunday. Do you understand?" Tears blurred Rebecca's vision as she nodded. "I understand. Good. He smiled then, the tension leaving his shoulders. "Now, since we're here, shall we practice?" Reverend Miller, who had been tactfully examining a hymnal at the back of the church, came forward at Matthew's beckoning. For the next hour they went through the ceremony step by step, not the words themselves, which would be saved for Sunday, but the movements, the positions, the practical details. By the time they left, Rebecca's fears had subsided, replaced by a quiet certainty that had been missing before. That night, for the first time in a week, she slept without nightmares. Sunday, June 18, 1883, dawned clear and perfect. Rebecca woke early in her room at Mrs. Cooper's boarding house, a flutter of anticipation replacing the dread she had felt before previous weddings. Mrs. Cooper helped her dress, arranging her hair in a simple updo adorned with small white flowers from the garden. "You look radiant, my dear," the older woman said, adjusting the veil. "And not just because of the dress. There's a confidence about you today. It suits you." Rebecca smiled, touching the locket Matthew had given her, which she wore beneath her dress. "I'm not afraid anymore." As the hour approached, Rebecca's few relatives arrived: her uncle from California, her aunt from Tennessee, both apologetic for missing Harold's funeral, but delighted to be present for her wedding. They brought gifts and good wishes, marveling at how the farm girl they remembered had grown into a composed young woman. When it was time to leave for the church, Rebecca discovered that Matthew had sent his own wagon to collect her, freshly painted and decorated with flowers. The driver was Tim Walker, grinning widely in a new suit. "Mr. Forrester asked me to tell you he's already at the church, Miss Lawson," Tim reported. "Has been for an hour, pacing something fierce." Rebecca laughed, the last of her tension dissolving. "Then we shouldn't keep him waiting any longer." The church was filled to capacity when Rebecca arrived, not just with relatives and close friends, but with what seemed like the entire population of Hot Springs. As she waited in the small antechamber, she could hear the murmur of voices, the occasional laugh, the notes of the organ as Mrs. Peterson played softly. Her Uncle Charles, standing in for her father, offered his arm. "Ready, Rebecca?" she nodded, taking a deep breath. "More than ready." The doors opened, and the congregation rose as Rebecca stepped into the sunlit aisle. But she saw none of them, her gaze fixed on the tall figure waiting at the altar, just as he had promised. Matthew stood straight and proud in a new black suit, his eyes never leaving her face as she walked toward him. And in that moment, Rebecca knew with absolute certainty that this time, everything would be different. This was not an ending, but a beginning of a life shared, of dreams fulfilled, of love that had been tested and proven true. When she reached him, Matthew took her hands in his smile brighter than the June sunshine streaming through the windows. "You came," she whispered, "for his ears alone." "Wild horses couldn't have kept me away," he replied. Then, with a wink that made her heart skip, he added, "After all, fourth time's the charm." And as Reverend Miller began the ceremony that would bind them together as husband and wife, Rebecca silently thanked the three men who had left her standing alone. Their rejection had led her here, to this man, to this moment, to the happiness that had always been waiting for her just around an unexpected corner. 10 years later, on a warm summer evening, Rebecca Forrester stood on the porch of the White House with the red door, watching her husband chase their 3 laughing children across the yard. Matthew caught their youngest, 5-year-old Harold, swinging him high in the air before setting him down to pursue 8-year-old Emma and 10-year-old James. The property had flourished under their care, the cattle farm prosperous, the orchards bearing fruit, the gardens abundant with vegetables and flowers. The old Lawson farmhouse stood restored on the neighboring property, now worked by Tim Walker and his family as tenants, ensuring Harold's legacy would continue. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Matthew gathered the children and herded them toward the house. "Time to wash up for supper," he called, ruffling James's hair as the boy protested. Rebecca smiled as her family approached, her heart full to bursting with the happiness she had once thought would never be hers. When Matthew reached her, he pulled her into a quick embrace, kissing her temple. "Happy anniversary, Mrs. Forrester," he murmured. Rebecca leaned into his strength, watching their children race inside. 10 years, she marveled. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Other times I can hardly remember life before you." "Only the good parts worth remembering," Matthew agreed, his arm warm around her waist. "I have something for you, a surprise." "Matthew, you didn't need to, I wanted to." He led her to the porch swing and sat beside her, reaching into his pocket. "Close your eyes." Rebecca obeyed, feeling something light settle around her neck. Opening her eyes, she looked down to find a delicate gold charm hanging beside the silver locket she still wore daily, a tiny horseshoe, studded with what appeared to be small diamonds. "For luck," Matthew explained. "Though we haven't needed much of that, have we?" Rebecca touched the charm, emotion tightening her throat. "No, we haven't." She leaned in to kiss him properly, ignoring Emma's giggle from the doorway. "Thank you for never giving up on me, for being the man who stayed." Matthew's eyes, still as blue and kind as the day they met, crinkled at the corners as he smiled. "Thank you for taking a chance on a dusty cowboy with big dreams." He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch as gentle as ever. "I told you 4th time's the charm." "The best charm of all," Rebecca agreed, resting her head on his shoulder as they swayed gently in the swing, watching the sunset paint their land in golden light, a perfect closing to another day in the life they had built together, the life she had almost been too afraid to claim. In the distance, the church bells of Hot Springs chimed the hour, their sound carrying on the evening breeze a reminder of promises made and kept, of faith rewarded, of love that had overcome doubt and fear to bloom fully in the fertile soil of trust and devotion. Rebecca closed her eyes, savoring the moment and the knowledge that this was only one sunset of many they would share in the years to come together, always together, until the end of their days.